So you've written this new book. What got you tackling these subjects? I love what you're writing about here. And I mean that not because we're friends, but because I like what you're talking about.
Well, I'm always writing. So my last book came out in 2018. Shook One: Anxiety Playing Tricks on Me. Thank you, for having me on and to support that book as well. But 6 years later, I've just been constantly like journaling and just really just observing the world. So like, this book is really just my take on just things that I've been seeing in society. And what I started to, come back to was number one, a theme about social media and the impact that I think social media is having on us as a society. And I went on this spiritual retreat earlier this year, back in February, and one of the things that came up for me was stop lying to yourself and stop volunteering those lies to other people, because I feel like that's what everybody in society is doing nowadays, especially because of social media. Because you wake up in the morning, it doesn't matter who you are. If you got 100 followers, 200 followers, 300 followers, 3 million, you feel like you got to perform for people. So you're never truly getting, who people really are anymore. Like everybody's approaching life with a mask, with this persona. And so it's just like, yo, I don't feel like things are going to ever, really move forward in our society the way we want them to, unless people, start being honest with themselves first. And when you're honest with yourself, then you'll volunteer that truth to others as opposed to volunteering those lies to others. And the why small talk sucks, came into play because I just feel like, man, we don't even know how to have big conversations anymore, Dr. Phil. I feel like everybody's so focused on confrontation over conversation. And it's like everybody has to pick a side as opposed to sitting down and having a discussion and maybe coming up with some solutions to these problems. And, everything is weighted on the same scale nowadays. Like the micros are on the same scale as the macros, and we're acting like these things weigh the same. And so when it comes time for us to have actual big discussions about things, we don't even know how, if we even choose to at all.
I think you're exactly right. You talk about the spiritual retreat earlier this year, but I think there's a thread that's all the way back to Shook One, because back then it seems like you had some real honest conversations with yourself that were reflected in that book. And I thought you took a pretty bold step to get really transparent about mental health issues and anxiety and that sort of thing, which is not an easy thing to talk about in the Black community. And you talked about it openly, honestly, and I thought really moved the needle in that community. And now you're saying here, these years later, that you got to be honest with yourself before you can be honest with other people. It seems like that started quite a while ago.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my daddy used to always tell me, man, I was raised in Mount South Carolina, in a rural area. So my daddy used to always tell me the fastest way between 2 points is a straight line. But the other thing that he said to me that always stuck with me was like, when you lie to people, you're not lying to people, you lying to yourself. So I would tell him a lie, and he would say, "You're not lying to me, you lying to yourself." And that did something to me, when I was very young, to where, man, it's like I can't do it. Like I need you to be honest with me, at all times, and I need to be honest with people at all times, because I want to always deal with the reality of the situation, Dr. Phil. Like you can't, you're a doctor. If somebody comes to you and their foot is hurting, but they're telling you that it's their hand, if you are sitting there trying to focus on their hand, you'll never focus on their foot. So you'll never ever focus and fix what's really, hurting a person. So it's like, for me, I have to approach things with honesty, especially, myself, because, we always talk about keeping it real. It's easy to keep it real with other people, right? Like you can look at somebody and tell them what's wrong with them, or tell them what you don't like about them, tell them you don't like what they're wearing. But boy, looking in that mirror and having that same conversation with yourself is a very difficult task for some people. For me, it is not at all.
Yeah, you talk about that in here a lot. Let's talk about social media in that regard, because it seems like we've got a really kind of narcissistic element to this society where people think if they're brushing their teeth, they got to have a camera on them and post it. And it makes us feel like we're performing all the time. Do you really think that has gotten people to wear a social mask instead of being authentic even worse than it was before all this social media dropped on us in like '09, '10?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like people care more about their digital lives than they do their real lives. You know, that's actually a really big pet peeve of mine. And people, it's almost like when you tell people that social media is not good for them, it's like we're the old people telling folks to get off their lawn, get off your lawn. Like we're telling people to get off the internet, and that's like the 2024 version of get off my lawn, you know. And, but it's true though. Like people need to disconnect, from social media because we're losing ourselves. Like it makes you feel like you have to perform. It makes you feel like you have to feed your followers. It makes you feel like you have to show up and pretend to live this life that you're not even living. Like I have a good friend. His name is Stephen Furtick. He's a pastor. We're from the same hometown, and he always says that social media is everybody's highlight reel. And so we are comparing our real lives that everybody else's highlight reel. Nobody shows you the process on social media, Dr. Phil. They just show you the end result. And the end result might not even be their end result. You really got people walking down the street and it might be a Phantom or a Maybach truck, on the side of the road, parked somewhere. They'll take a picture in front of it and post it like it's theirs. And then it'll be a bunch of people in the comments, putting 100 emojis and saying, "Oh man, you motivating me and you're inspiring me." That's not even that person's car. so it's too easy to pretend, on social media. And like I was always told, God can't bless who you pretend to be, man.
Well, I've had influencers on my show before that have fessed straight up that they actually go to this place out in Santa Monica that has a fake fuselage of a private jet. It's just in a warehouse. They rent it out in 15-minute intervals, and they go out there and get in that wearing like stuff that they're headed for the beach or stuff that they're headed for a ski resort. And they take all of these pictures like they have this big glamorous life. They save them up and post them throughout the year. And then people compare themselves to that fantasy life. And so they come out on the short end of the stick because they're saying, what a loser am I? I don't fly around in private jets. I don't go to these cool places like that. So by comparison, I'm terrible. I just don't get there.
And that's where the anxiety comes in. That's where the depression comes in. That's where the insecurity comes in, the imposter syndrome, because you're literally looking at these people and you're saying to yourself, man, I'm not on the level I need to be at. Why are all of these people doing so much better than me? But the reality is they're not. And we need to stop calling those people influencers and just call them what they are, liars.
Yeah.
They're just straight up liars. And that's why the book is called Get Honest or Die Lying. Like if you don't start being honest with yourself, you're going to die a liar.
Yeah. So how do we get people to focus on solving problems instead of trying to win arguments? Actually being real instead of trying to live this masquerade all the time. What's your conclusion? How do we get people to do that?
Well, number one, Dr. Phil, we got to stop being afraid. And what I mean when I say stop being afraid, there's so many of us that are afraid to give our honest opinions nowadays because we are afraid of the backlash from social media. And that's just the reality of the situation. People are afraid to be attacked on Twitter, to be attacked on these blog sites, to be attacked on the internet, simply because you choose to have an opinion that's not like everybody else. The reason, you see everybody resorting to these different extremes now is because when you are on one side of the aisle, or when you are a part of one community, there's safety in that group. So as long as you think like that group, as long as you talk like that group, as long as you move like that group, whatever opinion you put out there, there's always going to be somebody that has your back on that opinion. You know this, Dr. Phil. It is scary to step out there on your own and to say something that nobody else is saying, or to actually say what you really feel. If what you really feel, is different than what everybody else may be thinking about the subject. And that takes real courage. So people have to stop being afraid, of just having folks disagree with them. And if you can have a conversation and not be afraid of folks disagreeing with you, then I think, all of us will be able to sit down, look each other in the eye, have some conversations and say, man, I'm not trying to win this argument. I'm not trying to, slam dunk on this person just to score points with the social media crowd. I just really want to try to actually learn. And I think that's very hard for people to do because everybody thinks they know nowadays. So if you think you know, you're not going to be open to learning.
Only 23% of adults use Twitter, and 80% of that content is posted by 10% of the users. So you've only got 23% using it, and only 10% of them put up most of the content. So you really have a small group of people. It's like the tail wagging the dog. Everybody runs scared of trending negatively on Twitter or X or whatever. But I wonder if some of that is legitimate, because if they get after somebody, they start calling their job to get them fired, or if they're in business, they call their suppliers, they call their advertisers, they call people and get them to boycott. I had a woman on the show, Dr. Carol Hooven from Harvard University. She went to Harvard, and then she was a professor there for 20 years. She came on my show and Fox and Friends, and she just reported the data on trans athletes competing with biological athletes. Wasn't even her research. She just said, I study this area, so I'm going to report what the data is. And she just said the data says that you'll never get a level playing field. I don't care how much testosterone blocker you take. You'll never get a level playing field. That's what the data is from a meta-analysis of 50 plus studies. And they labeled her transphobic, drummed her out of that university after 20 years, said she was peddling hate speech, was transphobic, and drummed her out of the university and absolutely ruined her career just for reporting data. And she's actually very supportive of the transgender community. Didn't matter. It was like, got one, here we go, and she's gone. So I wonder if some of that is sadly legitimate.
Yeah, I'm sure it is legitimate, but what I would tell people who do things like that, you got to understand that that's a circular firing squad. So eventually, everybody's gonna take everybody out because if you dare to have an opinion about anything, or you dare to even objectively study something, the nuance of something, and you are able to see both sides, and like you said that woman was just reading the data based off something that she saw. So she's just presenting another side of the argument. If you dare to just present the other side of the argument, now somebody's going to be calling your job to have you fired. I don't respect people like that, Dr. Phil. What I like for people to do is if you believe something, you should be able to debate that something. You should be able to talk about that something. You should be able to say, hey, I hear your data, but this is what my research shows me, or this is what my lived experience shows me. If all you do is rush to go get somebody canceled, I don't think you have much of an argument, and I don't think you probably believe what you say you believe.
3 times as many people today are less apt to speak up than in 1950. That's got to be because of social media and the internet. They're just not willing to speak up.
Yeah, I don't have any problem, having conversations with anybody, but I can totally understand why people would have reservations, in this era, simply because you have a bunch of anonymous people that you don't even know attacking you via social media, or calling your job or emailing your job. You don't even know who these people are. Like I remember I went to Harvard one time, man. This was some years ago. It was like maybe, I don't know, 9, 10 years ago, maybe even a little longer. And, some of the students on Harvard's campus, wanted to boycott me. And I was like, why you want to boycott? And they were saying, because, you're transphobic. And I was like, well, why am I transphobic? They said I was transphobic and homophobic. So I said, why am I transphobic and homophobic? They said, because of your comments about Rachel Dolezal and Caitlyn Jenner. What I said was, because if you remember when Caitlyn Jenner came out, the very next week, Rachel Dolezal, who considers herself a transracial, came out. And so I simply said, I don't understand how people can, understand where Caitlyn Jenner is coming from, but not understand where Rachel Dolezal is coming from. Whether you agree or disagree, I'm just simply saying you should hear her out. Like,
Fair
you
question.
can't be so quick. You can't be so quick to dismiss her. And for whatever reason, the kids said that was me being transphobic towards Caitlyn Jenner. Oh, and the other thing I said was I was watching Caitlyn Jenner. I think she was being interviewed by Diane Sawyer. I believe it was Diane Sawyer, and I think it was one of her first interviews. And she said she was still attracted to women. So I'm just, I'm trying to be progressive and trying to keep up with the language. So I'm like, oh, well, if she's attracted to women, that means that she's a lesbian. If she identifies as a woman and she's still attracted to women, I guess she would be considered a lesbian now. Oh my God. They were acting, you're so stupid. You're so ignorant. Why? I'm asking questions. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to keep up with what's going on. But they were protesting me because of that. But because I simply said to them, hey, let's have the conversation. Instead of, protesting me, I'm going to be here anyway. The kids that want to see me are going to be here to see me. The kids that are protesting, how about coming here and let's have a conversation? And that's what we ended up doing. We ended up having a conversation. Now, do I think that, them thinking I was transphobic was ridiculous? Yes. Do I think it was stupid? Yes. But we still had the conversation.
You had to work at it, but at least they were willing to sit down.
That's right.